Well, I wanted to switch topics and talk a little bit about identity and kind of how the different challenges there. I know, as a security reporter, a lot of the incidents that I write about stem from, one stolen credential without MFA or something like that. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of info stealer malware proliferation in the threat landscape. So I would love to know the top challenges that exist right now for CISOs who are building out their security strategies that need to focus on this specific aspect of identity. How do you really make sure that that is embedded into the security strategy?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right in that most security bad days happen through someone using a valid credential. Like, attackers are not burning 0 days, so whether, I mean, and again, I work in this area substantively because what we're seeing is, this proliferation of apps. So build cycles are getting modular. And that means you're going to have app to app. You're going to have, you have this proliferation of apps. You're going to have an app for your payroll. You're going to have an app. You're going to have your IDP set of apps, whether that's, identity provider. So that's Microsoft or it's Google or whomever your Okta, whatever you're using. And then just actually, I think, whereas 7 years ago, folks were still very perimeter based with a lot of their approaches. Now we know that you have to be, more nuanced than that. Like, it needs to be behavioral based, it needs to be heuristics based, and it needs to be sort of like, this looks like odd behavior for this user at this time, not just blocking or granting access without any nuance to that. And I think the challenge is that you've got tons of data. You're going to have multiple, you'll have what could be a vast data lake of actions taken. And then so what? So the ones that you're going to have to care about that are odd, how would you know that it's anomalous? And so there's certain kind of like better ways to categorize those, from impossible travel. This person logged in Milan and then somehow in Topeka, or this person's looking at documents that, while they have the rights to access, they don't usually look at them, and certainly not in these patterns, and not with this exfil trail of data, or like putting together the pieces. And so I think we have the tech to be able to do fine-grained identity at scale, but it's still just like a nuanced. The best approach that we know is one that's more woven in, and that's complex. It's not rules-based and role-based.
Yeah, I mean, so, I'll date myself. I started in the identity field before it was the identity field, right? So I was working for American Express at the time, and we were shipping things all over the place, and you couldn't just walk down to Joe 3 cubes down and say, hey, I need access to these 3 systems, right? We had to figure out how to get access across so I've really kind of gone through that journey and seen the progression. I think there's fundamentally a couple of things. I think fundamentally, a lot of individuals think of identity as access, right? And it's not access. That's granting permissions to but identity is managing who that person is, what that person does, how that person's supposed to interact with your organization. That's what the identity is. And part of that is what they have access to. The other part that's, I think that's driving, and to Merritt, to your point, there's just so much data out there, right? So it's not just identity of the human, right? It's now the identity of the non-carbon-based life form, right? So your service accounts, your all IoT devices, your data, you go down the list. And to be able to get to a very fine-grained capability, and to get to step-up authentication. So when somebody is doing, wait a minute, that's we're going to release those numbers this quarter. It's not public yet. You're not supposed to be in there. Why are you in there? Like, you can start to do that. But it's really about cleansing the data that hasn't been cleansed for a very long time, cleansing identities that haven't been cleansed for a very long time, and then really weaving those together so that you have identity across your stack. It's not just the human part of it, and I think there's the transition in what the industry is going to, right? So like Reco, right, they are looking at that same approach on all of the cloud. And we all know in organizations, everybody gets their corporate card and they're like, oh, that's the greatest little thing ever, and I'm gonna go get that. And it's put into the ecosystem, no one's vetted it, no one's seen it, right? And so you have this massive sprawl of things that are in your ecosystem that people are accessing, data's accessing, IoT devices are accessing. You have to get that control over that identity up and down the stack. I mean, inevitably, that's zero trust, right? And I know that's a buzzword, right?
I intentionally avoided saying
Right. I get it's but like if you think about it and don't use the buzzword, that's what you have to do. And so it is, I think, the leading. It's the kind of the tidal wave that's coming at everybody, right? Because even if you go down the path of all the AI that's out there, right? If you haven't cleansed that data and you know where that data goes and where it comes from and where it flows, it's just garbage in, garbage out of that AI. And so you have to have identity of your data, right? And so it completely has to be up and down your stack. So I just think it's people are starting to think about it in a different way, and it's not just the human part of it.
I'm sorry, zero trust is such a bad term, but,
I know,
but it's a
everybody's
concept.
twitching on it.
It's something it's an entire attitude that we have to get there. But the pieces and parts are important, and in doing them individually, if we have to, is important. Hordes of data, right? So many devices, and then you've got so many people and so many accounts, and those all come together to form your identity. An organization like I work with, we're talking hundreds of thousands of accounts. Just that are, and then the service accounts, then the apps, then everything is it. You can only really get control of this with automation. Mm-hmm. Automation. I'm a huge fan of automation. User behavior analytics. Stuff that your analysts just can't possibly handle. And even if they saw something, what could they do with it? Now we have automated response to do something with that. Zero trust controls. I'm sorry. We should come up with a different term for it. Seriously, let's just coin a term.
I mean, for being engineers, it's just such a odd term because nothing is very. I mean, sure, we should start counting at zero, but very few things are actually 0 or 100, and certainly this is not. So.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the point of what the term is, but yeah, I mean, just continuous.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, right? I have a water bottle, it's a zero trust water bottle. Nothing comes in or out. It also doesn't do anything. We have to connect to the internet, we have to produce, we have to be in the business of whatever our bottom lines are, and to do that, we have to embrace this kind of weaving together. And so I think that's the point too, right?
Well, and I also think it's about if you start to think about identity and, you were talking about how, apps and app development has become so much more modularized, right? I think in my view, that's what I am trying to drive in my organization is what are those services and building those services that my development teams and can just plug into, right? I know they're set up correctly. I know that they're driven correctly, right? You're going to follow, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? So you're going to follow this path and it's going to make you go fast, it's going to make you go quick, and it's going to make you go secure. So here's our identity for applications, here's our approach for data, here's our approach for whatever it is up the stack, but then it's also from the how do I get my new application into my SIM or into how do you operationalize that it's simple? Because if it's simple, they'll do it. And if it's not simple, they are definitely going to find a way around it, right? And so trying to get that into a modularized approach that is dealing with all the data that's coming from all of these different entities of identity is challenging. And it's all has to be driven by how do you automate it, right? And once you can automate it, then you can move your people from doing a repetitive task up the value chain, and you're going to get we become much more proactive at that point in time. So it sounds like utopia. We're not all going to get there overnight, right? But that's kind of the path that we have to get to, right? And I think tools like what Reco's doing, I think tools that are allowing us to, automate, the repetitive tasks that can take those anomalies and action them, right, are the way of the future.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because most people probably aren't directly connecting the dots between like, current state of identity and like what a SOC analyst works on. But it does matter. There's a company I advise called Decipher that's working exactly on like taking these manual, and doing them in not just automated, but like intelligent, AI-driven ways that allow folks to prioritize. And actually the way that they describe their company is around the empathy for the analysts who are like 5 years in and burnt out. Like it's as a fun side note here, you will also keep your workforce.
Right, there'll be some work-life balance, right? And you won't be like
focused on higher order stuff. Right. Yeah, I think this always turns into like a jobs conversation at some point.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it gives a path, right? Because right now we're so inundated by data and those repetitive tasks. Like that's what you do, right? And so taking that out and being able to say, here's now your path for growth in being able to analyze things in a much more deep way, being able to understand how I can connect the dots to fix that up front. Like, because obviously there's some process or there's some people issue or there's some technology issue or all three that is causing that to happen, right? And what we do is we're solving the problem. At the point, we're not solving the root cause, right? And it'll allow us to get to root cause.